All right, guys, I hope you had a nice lunch break. We're going to be coming back now to do more of workshop 2, and we're going to pick up where we left off for step 4. So let me show you guys on our example site what feature we're actually going to implement here. So now that we're able to actually show our story content, we're also going to want to be able to upload new story content on our website. So again, if you go to weblab.is/example, you can see this page for yourself. But what we're going to be doing now is going to be able to upload new stories. All right, so let's walk through it. So yeah, this is the feature we are doing. So this step is going to be a little confusing, especially with the flow of information and what's happening here. So I'll be sure to kind of go through each and every sub-step of this and explain what's happening. But as a general overview, first, down here in the new post input component, this is where we're going to be receiving the user input from the website. So whatever they type in that box up there, we're going to be getting that from the new post input component. And then if you remember from yesterday's lecture, we're actually able to pass down callback functions as props. So that component is going to call on a callback function to actually send that user input up into the new story component. Now this new story component is going to use that user input to make a story object with that specific content we want to submit. With that story object, new story calls its own callback function, sends that object back up to feed. And remember, feed is where we have our story state defined. So it's going to update that state to include our new story object. Okay, so that flow of information, it works with kind of new concepts we just introduced. So it's okay if you're a little confused. Again, I'll walk through each part of this and explain what's happening. But let's actually implement it now. So feel free to reference the slide while you're working on this part. In the step 4.1, we're going to be in the feed file. 4.2, we're going to be in new story. 4.3, we are going to be back to feed. All right, so let's just start off with step 4.1. We're going to be working first in the very highest level at feed.jsx. And we're going to be creating the callback function to actually update our state once we receive a new state object. So in feed.jsx, line 8, create this callback function called add new story. It should take in one argument, which is a story object, and then you want to add this story object to your story state. So we have this hint for you guys here, and I'll pull up the reference slide too. But I'll give you guys a minute or two. Let's do 2 minutes to work on this, and then we'll come back and do it together. All right, raise your hand if you want 30 more seconds to do this. Okay, I'll give you guys 30 more seconds. All right, let's come back together and feel free to just pay attention to what I do and I'll explain the code that I write along the way. So let's move over to VS Code. And as always, moving on to the next step, you want to do git reset hard and then check out to the branch that we are working on, which is step 4. All right, so for this one, we're in feed.jsx, step 4.1, and we want to write a callback function to update this story state that we defined previously. So in order to do that, let's define our function, add new story, and that takes in a story object as input, and then let's actually define what this function does. And what we want to do is call the setter function to update our story, and make sure you guys aren't just passing in the story object, because remember, stories is an array, and we want to keep all of our old information and add on our new story object. So instead, let's do stories.concat and add that new story object. So that's what step 4.1 looks like. And here is the solution code. You guys can just take a second to take that in while I take any questions. All right, great. So step 4.2. Let me move back to the slide with the component tree and explain what we're going to be doing in 4.2. So what we did just now is we worked in the feed component to add a callback function that allows us to update our story state whenever we receive a new story object. So this next step, let's actually make that story object in the new story component. So now you're going to be moving over to the new post input.jsx file, and you're going to be working in line 57. This file is a little confusing because we have multiple components defined. I know our convention was to define components in its individual file, but this one we just have several components defined because they're kind of grouped by functionality. But find the new story component that's on line 57 and implement another callback function. Let's call it add story. And then this argument that we're going to pass in is the actual user input, which is just a string. So use that user input, the content argument, and create a story object with it. Remember, this is how we define our story object. You can pass in whatever dummy value you want for the ID and creator name, but let's use the input that we receive. So I'll give you guys another minute or two to do this, and staff will be walking around or on the queue to help you guys out. Sorry, I forgot to clarify one instruction. We also have you calling the callback function we receive as a prop with the new story object that you define. All right, can I get a thumbs up if you guys are ready to move on? Okay, maybe 30 more seconds. All right, let's come back together. So feel free to follow along as I code up the solution. Now we're going to be in the new post input.jsx file, line 70 here, as we implement the add story function. So remember, this input or argument content is the user input that we're going to be passing on in the next step, but this is going to dictate what our story object looks like. So let's actually define that story object. Let me just call it const new story. And then the fields up here that it has is ID. And we can just create whatever. The creator name also will just be a hard-coded value. But for the content, we want it to be the actual user input, which we receive here. So after creating that new story object, this component, new story, actually receives props. And the props that it receives is the callback function we defined in the previous step. So if we call in props dot add new story, that's going to call this function that we defined earlier. It might have been confusing because we haven't actually passed this prop down yet, but we're going to be making that connection later. So let's call that callback function and then pass along the new story object that we just defined. All right. So that's the first half of 4.2. Let me pause on the solution here. Any questions with what we just did? In the screenshot on the slides, it just makes a story object all in one line and adds it. In the code, I just wrote it all out for you guys. All right, let's move on. So in this part, we're going to also be in the same file, new post input. And if you go to line 74, we're actually going to render a new post input component. And now this component is one that the staff have defined for you. So you guys don't need to actually implement that yourself. But just know that it takes in a callback function. And every time the user clicks on the submit button, it's going to call that callback function and pass in the user input. So let's create a new post input and return it in our new story component and pass along these two props on submit and default text. Now on submit is just the function we defined just now, add story, and default text is just placeholder text. It's whatever you see in the box. It can be anything you guys want. But yeah, I'll give you guys a minute to do this. As a hint, it's just one line. And again, we always have staff helping you around. after I turn my mic on. All right, so we're still in the new story component, and down here, we're gonna actually return a new post input component. So that's just gonna look like this. And remember, we wanna pass in 2 props, and those 2 props are on the instruction slides right over there. But the first one is on submit, and we wanna pass down the function that we just defined up here, add story. And then the other prop is just default text. And this is just whatever that input box right here says. So that can be anything. All right, you guys might be confused what's happening here and what we're doing. So let me just quickly walk through what new post input is. And it's in the same file, it's up here. It's already defined for you guys, but I'll explain on a high level what it's doing. So it has a value state, and this value state is always updating as the user types something into that box. And then when it clicks on the submit button, it calls on the callback function it receives as a prop with that value. So what does that mean? It just means that whatever we pass in right here, it gets called with the user input as its argument. Okay. Any questions there about the process, the flow of information, what we just did? This is the solution. All right, I'm gonna move on then. All right, let's put everything together. This is the last part for step 4. We're gonna return to the feed.jsx file. You're gonna import the new story component you just defined, and you're actually gonna return it, and you wanna pass down the original callback function we defined, which was add new story for the prop. Remember, I'll have the reference slide up here showing how the props are passed down, and I'll give you guys a minute to work on this. And again, we'll come back together and I'll show you how to do it. All right, let's come back together. So remember, we're in the feed.jsx file now. And to actually use new story, let's first import it. We're gonna use curly brackets here because in the new post input.jsx file, we are exporting several things. So this allows us to specify which one we want. So let's just wrap that in curly braces and then specify where in our project that file can be found. Boom, boom, boom. And then the next part, let's actually return and render this component. I'm just going to have it above stories list, just so we have it on top for the actual website. Remember, this is how we define components, and it takes in a prop. That prop is add new story, and it's this callback function we defined in the first part. Okay, so that's it for 4.3. Now let's actually see the website and hopefully see it working. Right. Yeah, so if you go to localhost, remember npm run dev to actually pop up and see something. We have this bar and this submit button. So if you type something and click submit, hopefully it shows something. So as you can see, whatever I typed in just now is now displayed and rendered on the website. Also, this is a quick aside, but notice how my story is rendering at the bottom here. If I want to show it on the top, one cool little thing I can do is when I define this up here, when you use concat, it appends the element to the end of your list. But if I want the element at the front of the list, I can use object destructuring, which is a throwback to what we learned yesterday. So here is what that might look like. So let me just delete this. Pass the story at the front here, and then use the 3 dots to say we're going to destructure this stories array. So now let's see that in effect. And now my story shows at the top of the page. Pretty cool, guys. All right, I believe that's it for step 4. Let me pause on the solution code here. Are there any questions with what we did before I move on to step 5? Before Calvin moves on to step 5. Okay, great. So yeah, this is our result. Let me pass it off to Calvin now, where he's going to go over routing.
Okay, guys. I know you're all so excited to have me back at the mic. So obviously on our website, we want to have different web pages and we want to be able to navigate between them. Ideally, without having to call the server and ask it for a completely new website. And just be sure to recall our desired tree, which looks like we have our app, and we'll always have our nav bar. But then we want to render our feed, profile, or not found page based on the URL itself. And the way that we're going to do that is with routing. So routing, you guys don't have to worry too much about this in this lecture, but it's the base URL plus the route path behind it. So for example, catbook.com is the base URL, and you might have catbook.com/ or catbook.com/ profile. So slash or slash profile would be the route path, and you can actually render different content on your website page depending on the route path that comes after your base URL. If you have something like ASDF, then like this would not be a real web page, so that should display are not found, whereas slash profile should display profile and just slash should display feed. So this is what our different web pages should look like, and you can see at the top they're visiting these different URLs, and it should either render our feed page, our profile page, or a 404 page not found. So with routing, we'll use this class called the React Router. And this is just a quick crash course. We'll explain it more in depth in a later lecture, and you guys don't really have to worry about how this works. So I'll mainly be doing live coding, and you can follow along if you want, but this is just to help you guys understand where our navigation came from in later lectures when we're working on that. So after step 5, it'll look like this, where we have our app, and then our nav bar will always be at the top of either feed or profile. And if our web page is not found, then it'll just be the not found component for our entire web page. So you can see here there's an error in the path, so it would render not found. So be sure to just check out step 5. You do need the React Router DOM package in your package.json file. Fortunately, we've already included this for you, so as long as you guys ran npm install, you should be fine. So I'm just going to make sure that I'm on the step that you guys are. So we're going to be going to the root component here, which is index.jsx. And on line 6, we need to import the correct items. So we've actually already included this import for you, and it will be as easy as just uncommenting it here. And these are the only imports you should ever need for routing. Step 2 is to actually create the router. So we'll do that here. And for step 5.2, you also need to make sure to import feed, not found, and profile. Those should auto import when I'm writing this code here, but it'll look something like this. And you guys don't really have to worry about how this works, but you can feel free to follow along with the code that I have on the slide. All right, so what this does is it just renders our app element by default, and if there's an error at any point in the route, then it will instead render our not found element. And you can see here that it did auto import feed for us. For some reason, it didn't import not found, so I'm just going to copy this line to import not found for us. Okay. So to just go over what these lines of code are doing, it's creating a router for us. And what that router does is if everything is rendering properly, then it'll render our app component. If there's an error at any point, it'll render our not found component. And here, for the specific paths, it will either render our feed page, which should just be our default page, or it should render our profile page if the route is specifically /profile. And these two function calls will always stay the same, so they'll be the same for your guys' app as well. And now to actually render this route, we need to go here, and we need to put in this line of code. Instead of app, what we're going to do is we're going to put a router provider. And the router is going to be just the one that we defined earlier here. Let's just close that tag, like so. So just what this line of code is doing. Oh, I see we have a question. Oh yeah, great question. You're actually correct. We should be rendering the profile component. And let's just import profile as well. And this should actually import our not found element here and profile, like so. Good catch. Thank you. All right, again, what this line of code is doing is it's just calling this router that we created earlier, and it'll just render whatever it should based on the current URL. So the React router tree is formed by our pages, and the React router will show us the right content and the right URL/path. So this is what the tree will look like. So either it'll render app or it'll render not found. And then here, if it's just slash, then it will render feed. And here, if it's /profile, then it will instead render profile. So to actually render the proper content, we need to include outlets in our different components. So what an outlet is basically a pointer saying, hey, let's ask the router what component we should be rendering here, and it'll dynamically render that component based on what the router says to render. So to do that, we're going to our app.jsx here, and instead of rendering our feed, we are instead going to use our router, and that will just be using an outlet. And it did auto import outlet for us up here, but if it doesn't for you guys, make sure to import that. And now, if we visit localhost, then we go to localhost/profile, it will successfully render our profile. And if we go to some other page here, like let's say we mistype profile, then it will give us our not found page. Isn't that nice? And you can see that whether it's rendering the profile page or the feed page, it will still always have our navbar component that we've defined here. So the last step, of course, is to be able to click on tabs on the navbar. So the way that we're going to do this is using the link components from React Router DOM. The reason that you want to use these is because it's going to give us our local links. So whether you're running this on your local host server or a deployment server, it'll always have the correct base URL. I did this in my project where I didn't know to use link, and it created such a headache. Just be sure to use the links from React Router DOM. So that's going to be in our navbar component, which is right here. And for this, we are going to have our div for our navbar title inline block. Oh, wait, it's Command Z. Okay, we should be good here. And let me just indent this code so it looks nice. Okay, so what this code is doing, line by line, is first we're creating our inline block here. So it'll appear like inline with our title, Catbook. And then we are creating our two link objects. So this first one will just link to our home page. And notice you don't have to put localhost, I think it's like 5174 slash, right? Because this being a link component, React Router DOM will automatically, oh, yeah, okay, I think that link is imported correctly. If this doesn't render, then I'll have to import it manually. But React will automatically detect what the base URL is, and it will correctly navigate to the correct link from there. So now if we go to our website, okay, yeah. So what the 404 not found means is that there's an error with our code, which is probably just that I didn't import link. Now, if we go back, okay. Wow, this is not what it's supposed to look like. I think I did the correct. I think I did the correct styling, like the correct class name. Oh, no, it's clicking. It's just not appearing in line. Okay, well, you can see that we can still click these links properly. And it does go to our correct web pages here. And we can also still type in incorrect URLs. And it'll take us to a 404 not found page. Did I import the correct CSS? Guys, I'm not a front-end dev, so I'm not very good with styling. But this does still get our correct links working. And again, you guys can reference this for your own projects, but you don't really have to worry about how it works specifically for now. You will have to worry about how Skippy's steps work for steps 6 and 7. Great question, Lucas. So once you import your React router, if there's any like compilation error for your web page, it'll display your 404 not found page, which can like kind of be a tip off to the fact that something is not working on the back end. If you wanted to debug that, so let's just comment out this line so we can show it not working again, like this. So it's supposed to be rendering our profile, but something is going wrong. So we can do our developer tools, inspect, and then if we go to console, we can see here there's a reference error, link is not defined. So if I had gone into here, this is how I would have figured out that it was an import error. In general, looking at the console is super useful for debugging front end. So if your thing is ever not working, try looking at the console because maybe it'll tell you exactly where your problem is. Okay, back to Skippy.
All right, thank you, Calvin. So before we move on to step 6, let's recap what we've done so far. So first, we implemented the story feature in steps 1 through 4. And then with step 5 just now, Calvin introduced routing, and that allows us to navigate between the different pages of our Catbook website. But now let's actually implement comments. So that's what we're going to be doing in steps 6 to 8. And as you can see here, here is our main story. Down here, we're able to reply to those stories and have comments. So let's think about the design here and how we want to store state, what components we want to write. And one way we could do this is have this kind of component tree where feed has 2 children components, our single story, our single comment. But this kind of gives you the sense that these are separate features where if you look at the website, the story is grouped with all of the comments underneath it. So for styling and for just the developer kind of idea, let's wrap these 2 components in a container component. So we'll be doing that by implementing the card React component. And if you see here, it's just encapsulating the single story and all the comments within it. So that's what we're going to be doing in step 6. Before we move on to comments, let's just keep them hard-coded for now and just have this card component going first. So step 6.1, you're going to be in the feed file. And then in the last 2 steps, 6.2, 6.3, you're going to be actually in the card component file. And then these are the props that we're passing down. So as always, reference this slide if you're confused on the flow of information. But for step 6.1, you're going to be doing 2 things. So you're going to first be working in the feed.jsx file. On line 4, you're going to import your card component instead of single story. So just replace that import entirely. And then on line 39, we're going to be replacing single story with card. And you're going to keep the exact same props It's just a one word change there for line 39. So I'll just give you guys a minute to do this, and we'll come back at the end. All right, let's come back together. I'll show you guys how to do step 6.1. As always, before we move on, get reset and check out to the step that we're currently working on, which is step 6. All right, so you're in the feed file. First thing you're doing is removing the single story import and replace it with card. So let me just do this. All right, that's how you import card. And then let's actually use it down here and replace single story with the card component we just imported. So those are the only changes you're doing for this part. Let me move to the solution code. This is what it looks like. Any questions there? No questions, yay. All right, step 6.2. Now, remember we're kind of restructuring our component tree here. So let's move single story into the card component and have it there. So import, your first thing you're doing is you're importing useState and the single story component. And then next, we're gonna get ready to implement the comments feature. So also define a comment state and initialize this to an empty array. I'll give you guys a minute to do this. Does anyone want more time to do this step? Okay, let's move on then. All right, step 6.2. For this part, we're gonna be in the card.jsx file. So let's move that over here. And let's import the things we need to use. So first, useState. That's from the React library. So let me just do that up here. And then our single story component. Remember, this is our syntax for that. Import single story. And it's located in the same folder. So we can just do / single story. Yo, I forgot from. All right, so that's how you import it. Now let's define our comment state. Remember, to do that, you do this object destructuring. We're unpacking whatever useState returns. So let's call it our comment state. And then as convention, always do set and then your state name. So set comments. And then let's call on the useState function we just imported. And the value we want to initialize the comment state is an empty array. So let's just pass that in. And that's it for step 6.2. Whoops. Any questions there? Okay. All right. Last part of 6. So in this one, we're going to still be in the card.jsx file. And similar to what we did for stories, we're going to define more dummy comment objects with hard-coded values. So on the right-hand side, we have an example or how your comment object should be structured. Each object should have 4 fields: an ID field, creator name, parent, and content. Now for this, you can just pass whatever values you want when defining these objects, and we're going to store that in the comment state. But one thing different from these stories is that you only want to include the relevant comments. So what does that mean? Remember, right now, this comment state has every single comment on the website, but we have this parent property to let us know which story is this comment under. Now that parent property is just the ID of the story object. So use that piece of information and also another hint is use the filter function to kind of make sure that the parent matches up with the story that we're working with. All right, so that was a bit confusing. Do you guys want any clarification again with the instruction? Okay, questions doc is also there. All right, and then after you do that, you're gonna render the comment state. Remember, we're just gonna make this like raw string with just the object. So you're gonna do JSON.stringify again, and then you're gonna render a single story with the same props we have from feed.jsx. So this is kind of a lot. I'll give you guys 4 minutes to do this and check in on time if you guys need more. Okay, again, just to clarify, we're in the card component. Remember that we received the following props: ID, creator name, and content, and those are just information for the story that this card is showing. And you can use that ID prop and compare it against the parent field of a comments object to make sure that we're storing the correct comments for this specific story. Does anyone want more time to work on this? Raise your hand if you want like an extra 30 seconds. Okay, I'll give you guys 30 more seconds to do this. All right, let's come back together now. I'll show you guys how to do this part, so feel free to just follow along. All right, first thing we need to do is assign or create dummy comments, and then update our comment state with them. So let me just make a bunch of comment dummy objects. And up here, we specify what properties you should use. So let me just create some fake little thing. And one thing to note here is we want our parent to match up with the story IDs here. So let's say that I want this comment to be under story 1. I'd pass in ID 1. Let's just make this comment say hi. All right, now let's make a bunch of more comments, just hard-coded. Call that comment 2, comment 3. Let's say I want this comment 2 to be under story 3. Its ID is ID 3, so I'm going to specify its parent ID as ID 3. And let's say I want comment 3 to also be under story 1. So I'll just keep it like that. Let's change the actual comment ID here. All right, so those are our dummy objects. Now let's put them into an array. All right, now let's use our filter function that we learned about yesterday in advanced JavaScript. And what that does is that it iterates through each element and it checks it against a condition. If that condition evaluates to true, it will pop up in our new returned array, and if it's false, it's filtered out. So to do that, let's first, I'll make a new array called filtered comments, and let's call the filter on this object, these comment object array I just defined. So that dot filter, and its input is each comment element. And then we're just going to return if the comments parent field is the same as the story ID that this card is working with. So that's what that should look like. And now let's set our comment state to this filtered array. Whoops, never do that, guys. I forgot. You want to use it like this because it's a function call. All right. So this is how you would do the first part. What we're doing here, again, is I just made a bunch of dummy comment objects, put them in an array, and then use the filter to make sure that we're only updating the state with comments that are under the story that we're working with. Remember, a card is just a single story with all the comments under it. So its ID prop that it receives is the same ID as the story that we're displaying. So that's what this condition is. All right, so the next part is that we're rendering the comment state as well as a single story. So let's just do that in our return block here. First, let's render our story. Remember to do that, syntax looks like this. And single story receives the props of underscore ID, creator name, and content. So you guys can just do whatever for this. Let me just make up some values. And having rendered our single story with the correct props, now let's render the comments that we just defined. But remember, in order to show it as a string, we want to use json.stringify. So let's pass that on, like so. Why is it complaining? Do we already have a return? I see. No. Right. We just had to wrap it up in a div. Okay. Let's see this on our website. So as you can see here, it's not showing any of the comments I passed in. Let's find out why. Each child in a list should have a unique key prop. Could this be it? For the single story? It's not a list though. You know what? I think it's because of this. Wow, I'm trolling. Ooh. All right. Sorry, guys. Let me explain what I just did to debug this. So what was happening is that because of our filter, I was incorrectly, the condition was correct, but I was passing in the wrong values. So here, notice that when we passed down the ID props, I was passing in the test underscore ID prop when I assumed that we were passing in the ID that we defined up here. So once I fix this to make sure that it's checking for that and change it here, Now this comment should be under every story that we define. And then now our filter function can proceed as it was intended. So let me just change this to how it was originally intended to be. So now this card component is going to receive the ID that we define here in the object. And now in the comments object for the parent field, this one will actually now match this story object. This one will match story 3. And this one will match, once I update it, story 2. So hopefully this reflects that. Yeah. So ID 1, it's in story 1. ID 2, story 2. ID 3, story 3. All right, sorry for that confusion, guys. So that's step 6. And let me pause on the solution here. Are there any questions with what we just did? All right, if not, let's move on to step 7, where we're actually going to be implementing comments, so we're not just displaying this raw string of text. And it's going to be very similar to what we did for the story feature, where we're going to turn this object data and use it with map function, the map function, and turn it into a renderable React component. So as always, here is our reference slide. And for the first part, step 7.1, you're going to be working in the single comment component, and you're actually going to be implementing that to render the author and content of the comment. So this component receives these props, and you're going to pass along those props to render this information. So I'll give you guys a minute to do this, and then we'll come back, as always, to figure it out. All right, let's come back together to do this step. So remember, we're in the single comment.jsx file, and we're going to be rendering these two pieces of information, the creator of the comment, as well as the actual contents of the comment. And we're going to be relying on our props to access that information. So let's do this. And remember, the comment creator is stored in creator_name. And that's it for that part. And then to actually show the content, similarly, we're going to pass along props dot content. And now you won't see anything show on the website because we're not rendering any single comment components yet. But this is what we're going to be doing in the next step. All right, so let me pause there. Any questions? No questions. All right, step 7.2. So now for this one, you're going to be in card.jsx. And similar to stories, you're going to be using the map function again to filter or go through all of the comment objects and use that information to create a single comment component. Now, you're going to want to store these components in an array. And then in the next part, you're going to replace our json.stringify comments with the actual array of single comment components. So it's very similar to what we did for stories. So as a hint, feel free to refer how we did that. It's located in feed.jsx, lines 34 and lines 47. Again, we have a diagram showing how props are passed down. So I'll give you guys maybe 3 minutes to do this, and we'll check in on time. 30 seconds. If not, let me show you how to do it. So for this step, we're in card.jsx. And similar to what we did for the stories object, we're going to convert these comment objects into single comment components. And that's what we just implemented in 7.1. So first, let me define an object to store our comment components in. And let's call that comment list. And then we'll have a flag variable to check if we have any comment data or not. Because remember, we have two cases. One, if we actually have data to show. Two, there's nothing, and we want to let the user know that there are no comments to show. So has comments, let's just call that flag variable that. And it's just going to check the length of our comment state and whether or not it's empty. All right, so let's check this condition. And if it has comments and we have data to work with, let's use the map function to actually return comment components. So we'll set that and store it inside the comment list. And let's do comments dot map. Then we're going to iterate through each comment object in the array. And for each one, we're going to return a single comment component using the data that the object contains and pass it down as props. So the props that single comment takes is ID, creator name, and content. So let's just do that. Remember, all that information is found in these objects. So let's do comment object and then access that property for all of these props. All right, so that's it for this case. And again, what we're doing is that we're iterating through each element in the comments array. And with that element, we're going to create a single comment component using the information that it contains and passing it down as props, like so. Okay, so now let's do the case where it's empty, we have no data to work with. So all we're going to do is just set comment list as a div, saying that we have no comments to show. All right, so this is how you would use map to get single comment components out of our objects. Next, let's actually show these comments down here when we're actually returning stuff to display. Previously, we were just doing some raw string showing the actual object itself, but that's pretty ugly. So let's replace that with what we just did and pass in comment list instead. So now if you go to our website, suspicious. It could be the filter function again. Yeah, they do. Well, this is just saying that each child should have a key prop. But I think that's just a warning. Okay. Filter should be working because the IDs line up. Do we ever import single comment? Yes. Maybe it is the key. Interesting. Hmm. Everyone say thank you, Calvin. Okay, so the issue was that I was doing this check, but I wasn't actually adding this comment component to the array. So good catch, Calvin. All right, now we're able to see comments under our stories. So I'll pass it along to Calvin so we can actually create comments.
Okay, guys, but first, you've been sitting down for about an hour and a half. And when I was sitting down for an hour and a half on my flight yesterday, I started to not be able to feel my legs. So let's just all get up and stretch for a sec. Maybe stand up while I do some stand up. Thanks, Lucas. Okay, real quick. We're just gonna make sure that we're prepared. Um, for this stand up, guys, please actually stand up. It really helps. Here, where's the? Is it here? Yeah, here we go. All right, guys, you ready? What do you call something that's red and fuzzy? A red fuzzy. Is it? All right, guys. What do you call something that's blue and fuzzy? Any guesses? That's a good one, Lucas, but it's not a labubu. No, it's a red fuzzy holding its breath. All right, guys. What do you call something that's green and fuzzy and will kill you if it falls on you? A pool table. Let me check my good jokes notepad on my phone. Actually, Loki, I think that's enough humor for the day. Let's wait until there are more people here to appreciate my comedic genius. Oh, there's which one? No, it's too similar to the last one. Okay, guys. Enough lollygagging. It's time to lock in. Um, okay, here is that. All right. So next up, just make sure we're all on the same page. Get reset hard. Get checkout. Step 8. Um, I'll do that along with you guys. Alrighty. So, naturally, we want to actually be able to post new comments, just like we can post stories, and those new comment posts should be tied to the specific post. Because imagine if, like, every time you wanted to post a comment on Facebook, you also had to type the ID of the post that you were trying to post a comment to. Not very helpful. So we want to have this block directly underneath each specific post, and when it posts a comment, it should automatically create the correct one. So mainly for this, we're going to be working in card.jsx to actually add our new post input, and we're also going to be working in new comment to format our new post input component. So first up, for 8.1, I'm just going to have you guys implement the callback function add new comment in card.jsx. And this should update the comment's state with the passed in comment object. So you can assume that the input of add new comment is going to be a JSON object already formatted correctly, and you just need to add that to the end of your comment's state. All right, raise your hands if you need more time. Give you guys a couple more seconds here. All right, let's just come back together and actually implement this callback function. So we're going to be working in card.jsx, specifically in this area right here, which is the add new comment callback function. So there's a callback function, so we're just going to initialize it like this, add new comment, and we are going to set this to take in a comment. And what we're going to do inside is we're going to call our state setter here. And what we are going to set it to is just the current comments dot concatenate with our new comment. Because remember, our comment should already be formatted correctly. So it should be the same format as all of these other comments. If we go to the solution slide here, you can see this is exactly what we have. So again, what this is doing is it's just defining our callback function, which takes in a comment and it just adds it to the end of the list of current comments and then sets the list of current comments to this new appended list. Oh, yes, question. Oh, yeah, that's true. I am creating a double array here. Good point. Thank you. Yeah. So for 8.2, this is going to be in our new post input .jsx. Specifically in new comment here, we're just gonna have you guys implement new comment. So it should be the callback function, and it should also return the new post input. And for this, you can refer to add new story. You can see how we do it. And yeah, just go ahead and implement that. How are we doing? Do we think we need some more time? Let me get a raise of hands if we're done. Okay, I'll give us a couple more seconds here. All right, let's just come back together here for a second now. And we're going to go ahead and implement this. So what add comment should do is it should take in the content, and it should be calling our add new comment prop, and it should be calling the function with the correct new comment. So to do this, we're going to do props dot add new comment, because that is the name of the prop. And what we're passing in here is our new comment object. So a comment object is going to have an ID, and this can just be some like random ID here. It's going to have our content, which is just going to be the actual content that is being passed into this add comment callback function. It's going to have a creator name, which we'll just put this to our favorite person. And it's also going to have a parent, which is going to be the story ID prop. So this is going to be props dot story ID. And we know that because if we look here, then it has a very nice documentation string here that tells us we're going to have a prop called story ID. So this is actually all we need for implementing our callback function, and to actually return the correct thing, we're going to add a new post input. And remember what a new post input takes. If we look here, it's got default text, which is going to be new comment. And it is also going to have its on submit, which is going to be our add comment callback function that we defined right here. And if we just go to the solution slide here, you can see there's our callback function. Okay, and we actually went ahead and did the second part of 8.2, which is this, which is actually returning our new post input. And you can see the solution for that is here. So I'll just leave this up on the slide. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to ask. All right. And then moving on, for the last step, we actually need to implement our new comment component, which we've exported here. So I'll give you guys a minute or two to do this, but this is just going to be in card.jsx, remember? And we are going to put our new comment component right here. After you have imported it, of course. All right, just checking in. Raise your hand if you think you need a little bit more time here. Okay, it's looking like most people are done. So I'm just going to go and implement this with you guys. So this is going to be a new comment here. And this should actually just be an instant closing tag. Like this. And that should have auto-imported it. Yes. How nice. It has auto-imported it for us. And remember, the props that that's going to take is a story ID, which is just going to be props dot, I believe that this takes, yes, an ID, like so. And it is also going to take our add new comment callback function, which we defined here. All right, so again, just what this one line of code is doing is it's appending our new comment component right after the comments list. And what it's passing in is its story ID and our callback function, which we defined earlier, which will actually append a new comment to the end of this array of comments here. So now, if we go into here, you can see we have our very nice new comments here. And if we post one here under story 1, hi, then we can see that it's properly posting it and it's only under the one story. It's not posting it under every story. We can comment here as well, and it's working as intended. So I'll leave the solution code up on the slide for a bit. And if you guys have any questions, please feel free to ask. A result will look something like this. All right, and it looks like we've got a little bit extra time. So this part is going to be an optional cleaning up, just making our component tree look a little bit nicer. And in general, just practicing some good practices for when you are writing your own component trees. So as always, we're going to git reset and check out. So currently, our component hierarchy looks something like this, where we have our app and then feed, and then in our feed, we're going to have our cards, and each card is going to have the story, and then a list of comments, and then after the list of comments, it's going to have the new comment. But after step 9, it's going to look like this, where we have a comments block, which is completely separate from the actual content of the story. So this is the component hierarchy, and I will leave this up as I'm having you guys do the steps. But this is where we're going to be working in card and in comments block. So for step 9.1 in card, you should import the new comments block component, which we've created for you, which is why you got to be on the correct Git branch. And then we need you to replace the new comment component and instead render the comments block component. So you should replace the new comment component and your comments list component with the comments block component. All right, we're running a little bit short on time, so I'm just going to go and implement this for you guys. So this is going to be in card.jsx. Instead of our comments list and our new comment, we are going to replace that with a comment block. Okay, and it looks like we're going to have to import that as well. Import comments block. from, and that should be from this file here. And in our comments block, we have to pass in the correct props, which is on the reference slide here. So you can see the comments block takes in a comments object, a story object, and an add new comment function. So it's going to be a it's just the props here, and that is going to take in our add new comment, our callback function here. All right, and we can actually remove our comments list as well, because that's going to be rendered down below. All right, so this is our solution. I'll leave this on the slide for a bit. We are getting out in a few minutes, so I would like to move things along. And again, this section is optional, so you guys don't have to worry too much about it. This is just cleaning things up. So next up, I think I'm just going to live code this for you guys in comments block.jsx, which you can see is here. We need to import our single comment and new comment. We need to create our list of single comment components and render our list and render our new comment component. So this is actually going to be very similar to what we had in card.jsx. So in fact, what we should be able to do is just copy this and paste it into here. And of course, we need to import our single comment and new comment. So we're actually just going to move these imports over as well, like this. And then we need to render our list of single comment components, which of course is going to be our variable called comments list. And then lastly, we need to render our new comment with our correct props, which if we just reference new post input over here, we can see our props are going to be story ID and our add new comment. So that's going to be in here. Story ID equals props dot why is this props dot we also need to define our props here. Story dot ID, and then our add new comment function is going to be add new comment, which is passed down here as props dot add new comment, like so. And then if we go to our Catbook, oh, lovely. Okay, yeah. That is because right here we are trying to access comments. Comments does not exist. It should be props.comments here, right? Because comments is contained in the card. And now if we go back, it looks a lot nicer, and we have this comments block here with some nice formatting and padding. So the comments and the add new comment button appear completely separately. All right. I'll leave this up on the slide here, and you guys can always refer to these slides later. weblab.is/schedule has links to all of the slides. So this is the end. If you'd like to see a solution, you can check out Workshop 2 complete. And for now, just please leave feedback, and that should be all for today. Thank you for coming, and we will see you tomorrow with more great jokes.